December 21st, 1944. Malmedy, Belgium. 4 days into what would become the bloodiest battle ever fought by American forces, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and turn the tide of World War II. Just days before, on December 17th, SS troops under the command of Joachim Peiper had committed one of the war's most horrific atrocities, massacring 84 American prisoners of war in a frozen field. The Malmedy Massacre. The SS were given orders to instill terror, to show no mercy, to break the American will to fight. But on this frozen morning, in the pre-dawn darkness, the hunters would become the hunted. Because standing between the Wehrmacht's finest panzer divisions and their objective was a 19-year-old orphan from upstate New York who had mastered every weapon the U.S. Army possessed. His name was Francis Sherman Currey, and over the next 12 hours, he would become the single most terrifying thing the German Army encountered in Belgium. To understand what happened on that frozen December morning, we need to go back. Back to Loch Sheldrake, New York, June 29, 1925. Francis Sherman Currey entered a world that would test him long before he ever set foot on a battlefield. At age 12, Frank Currey's world collapsed. His parents died, leaving him orphaned. He was placed in the New York State foster system, eventually landing with a family on a farm in nearby Hurleyville. This wasn't a childhood of comfort, it was a childhood of survival. He worked the farm for his room and board, sunrise to sunset, no payment except survival. The foster county program kept him fed and sheltered until he turned 16. Those years taught him something that would save his life and the lives of countless others: how to endure. But Frank Currey wasn't just surviving, he was learning. On June 22, 1943, 1 week after graduating from Hurleyville High School, 17-year-old Francis Currey walked into a U.S. Army recruiting station and volunteered. He was so young, so untested by Army standards, that when he actually completed officer candidate school at just 18 years old, his superiors made a decision that would change the course of his life, and the lives of countless men he would later save. They denied him his commission. The official reason: he was too immature to be an officer. So Private Currey was sent to infantry training. And this is where the legend actually begins. Because while other young soldiers focused on mastering their assigned weapon, Frank Currey became obsessed with learning every weapon the Army had. The M1 Garand rifle, the Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, the Browning 1919.30 caliber machine gun, the .50 caliber heavy machine gun, the bazooka, mortars, anti-tank grenades. If it could kill, Frank Currey learned how to use it with devastating efficiency. July 1944. 1 month after D-Day. Private First Class Francis Currey landed at Omaha Beach. The initial waves had already stormed Fortress Europe. Now came the reinforcements, the replacements who would push inland and finish what had been started on June 6th. In September 1944, Currey was assigned as a replacement to one of the most distinguished units in the European theater. Company K, 120th Infantry Regiment, 30th Infantry Division. The Old Hickory Division, named after President Andrew Jackson, the 30th Infantry Division was composed primarily of National Guard troops from Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Georgia. They had fought through Normandy, liberated French towns, and earned a reputation as one of the finest fighting forces America had ever fielded. The Germans called them Roosevelt's SS. It was meant as a compliment, a recognition that when you faced the 30th Division, you were facing soldiers who fought with the same ferocity, discipline, and skill as Germany's elite units. But when Currey joined them at Herzogenrath, Germany, in October 1944, he arrived without winter gear. The army hadn't prepared for a winter campaign. They thought the war would be over by Christmas. They were wrong. Francis Currey would suffer from frostbite. He would see his first combat that month, and just 6 weeks after joining Company K, this 19-year-old orphan farm boy from New York had been promoted to sergeant and given command of the 3rd Platoon. On December 16, 1944, Hitler launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. The Allies called it the Battle of the Bulge. 250,000 German troops, backed by tanks, artillery, and the last reserves of the Wehrmacht, smashed into the American lines in the Ardennes forest. Their objective? Split the British and American armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies to sue for peace. And standing directly in the path of this massive German offensive was the 30th Infantry Division and Sergeant Frank Currey. December 17, 1944. One day into the German offensive, the town of Malmedy, Belgium. This small Belgian town had already suffered under German occupation from 1940 to 1944. Now, as the Americans defended it, the residents found themselves once again in the crosshairs of war. Spearheading the northern thrust of the German attack was Kampfgruppe Piper, a battle group of the 1st SS Panzer Division led by SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Piper. These were Hitler's elite, veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had learned warfare in the most brutal theater of the most brutal war in history. At around 1 p.m. on December 17th, Piper's column encountered an American convoy near the Bornier Crossroads, just 2 miles southeast of Malmedy. Battery B of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, 30 vehicles carrying nearly 140 men, was heading south when they ran straight into the German spearhead. It wasn't even a fight. German tanks destroyed the lead and rear vehicles, trapping the convoy. Outgunned and outmaneuvered, the Americans surrendered. 113 American soldiers were herded into a snow-covered field near the crossroads. They had surrendered. Under the Geneva Conventions, they were protected prisoners of war. And then, the machine guns opened fire. 84 American soldiers were murdered in that field. Those who survived the initial volley played dead as SS troops walked among the bodies, shooting anyone who moved, anyone who breathed, anyone who groaned in pain. Some Americans escaped. They ran through the snow, taking fire as they fled toward Malmedy, toward American lines. 43 survivors made it back. They told their story. Word spread like wildfire through the American ranks. The Malmedy massacre didn't break American morale. It hardened it. Soldiers who had been ready to show mercy to surrendering Germans now understood they were fighting an enemy who showed none. The rules had changed. And nowhere was this fury more concentrated than in the 30th Infantry Division. Because the 30th had the misfortune, or perhaps the destiny, of being positioned directly in Kampfgruppe Piper's path. December 21st, 1944, 4 days after the massacre. Private First Class Francis Currey and his squad from Company K's 3rd Platoon were defending a critical strongpoint, a bridge crossing near Malmedy. It was about 4 a.m. The darkness was just beginning to fade into that hazy, gray pre-dawn light. Fog and mist hung over the frozen ground. Visibility was maybe 200 yards. 200 yards to see death coming. Currey was serving as an automatic rifleman, armed with his BAR, the Browning automatic rifle. 20 rounds of .3006 ammunition, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute. Then came the artillery. German shells began falling on the American positions. Currey knew what this meant. He'd been in combat long enough to read the signs. Artillery meant an attack was coming. Infantry would follow. But when the smoke cleared and Currey looked down the road, he didn't see infantry. He saw the barrel of a German tank protruding around a corner, a Panzer. And standing in the turret, surveying the scene with absolute confidence, was a German tank commander. The commander never saw Currey, and he never saw what came next. Currey opened fire with his BAR, cutting down the tank commander where he stood. But the tank kept coming. One man with a rifle couldn't stop 30 tons of German steel. Currey fell back across the bridge, running toward a nearby barn. Inside, he found exactly what he was looking for: a bazooka. The M1A1 bazooka. A tube that could fire a rocket capable of penetrating tank armor. But it required 2 men to operate effectively, 1 to aim and fire, 1 to load. And it was dangerous to use in the open because the backblast gave away your position immediately. Currey found another American soldier, Private Adam Lucero, and together they loaded the weapon. Through the barn window, they could see the German tank advancing on their position. Currey aimed, fired. The rocket hit the base of the tank's turret, the perfect shot. The turret jammed, rendering the tank's main gun useless. The German tank retreated. But Sergeant Currey's war had only just begun, because minutes later, 3 more German tanks rounded the corner, heading straight for the bridge. This is the moment that defines what made Francis Currey so terrifying to the Germans. Most soldiers, faced with 3 advancing tanks, would fall back, would call for support, would wait for orders. Currey didn't wait. He spotted a destroyed American anti-tank gun position nearby, and next to it, a knocked-out half-track. Through heavy German machine gun and rifle fire, Currey ran across the open street to that half-track. Let that sink in for a moment. A 19-year-old soldier, under fire from 3 tanks and supporting infantry, running through a kill zone to reach a destroyed vehicle. Inside the half-track, he found a case of anti-tank grenades. Now, here's what you need to understand about these weapons. Anti-tank grenades launched from an M1 rifle weren't really effective at destroying tanks. They made noise and smoke, psychological weapons more than anything else. You had to get within 50 to 60 feet of a tank to even hit it. 50 to 60 feet. That's the length of a bowling alley. Frank Currey took those grenades and began firing at the 3 German tanks, one after another, in full view of the enemy, standing in the street, deliberately drawing their attention. The German tank crews, seeing explosions and smoke and hearing what they thought were multiple weapons firing at them, believed they were facing a much larger American force. One by one, they abandoned their tanks, retreating to a nearby house to regroup with their infantry. Currey had just single-handedly stopped 3 German tanks without destroying a single one of them. He'd bluffed them. But he wasn't finished. Currey saw the Germans taking cover in the house. He also saw 5 American soldiers pinned down by enemy fire, unable to move, unable to retreat, slowly being surrounded. He grabbed his automatic rifle and advanced on the house. Alone, in the open, within 50 yards of enemy-held positions. He killed 3 Germans in the doorway, then he climbed onto the hood of the abandoned half-track, in full view of the enemy, and opened fire with the vehicle's mounted .30 caliber machine gun, raking the house with sustained fire. Think about what this looked like to the Germans. A single American soldier, standing on a vehicle, firing a machine gun at their position, while their tanks sat abandoned in the street. It was audacious. It was insane. It was absolutely terrifying. But Currey still had 5 trapped Americans to rescue, and there was still a German-held machine gun position that had his men pinned down, a position whose entire crew had been killed by German fire. Currey ran to that position, again crossing open ground under heavy fire. He reached the machine gun, got it operational, and began laying down covering fire so intense that the 5 trapped American soldiers were able to escape to safety. Let's take stock of what one 19-year-old soldier had done in approximately 12 hours of continuous combat. He had engaged and disabled one German tank with a bazooka. He had forced the crews of 3 more tanks to abandon their vehicles using essentially psychological warfare. He had killed multiple German infantrymen in close combat. He had manned multiple weapon systems, BAR, bazooka, anti-tank grenades, 2 separate machine guns, switching between them as the tactical situation demanded. And he had rescued 5 fellow American soldiers, 2 of whom were wounded. The German attack on that sector failed. Deprived of their armor and having taken heavy infantry casualties, they were forced to withdraw. The flank of the American battalion held, and it held largely because of one soldier who refused to stop fighting. As night fell, Currey and his squad, including the 2 wounded men, tried to make their way back to American lines. They found an abandoned army jeep fitted with stretcher mounts. They loaded the wounded onto it, and Francis Currey, sitting on the jeep's spare tire with his BAR across his lap, rode shotgun back to friendly lines. In March 1945, Currey's company commander recommended him for the Medal of Honor for his actions on December 21st. On July 27, 1945, with the war in Europe already over, Major General Leland Hobbs presented Francis Currey with America's highest military decoration for valor in a ceremony near Reims, France. The citation read, in part, "Through his extensive knowledge of weapons and by his heroic and repeated braving of murderous enemy fire, Sergeant Currey was greatly responsible for inflicting heavy losses in men and material on the enemy, for rescuing 5 comrades, 2 of whom were wounded, and for stemming an attack which threatened to flank his battalion's position." But that single day wasn't the whole story. Not even close. After Malmedy, Currey continued fighting. Later in the battle, he was engaged in brutal house-to-house combat. German soldiers threw grenades from above. Currey set fire to hay in a barn to smoke them out. He fought in frozen foxholes. The ground was too frozen to dig proper defenses. On January 14, 1945, during an assault on German positions, Currey displayed such gallantry that he was awarded the Silver Star, America's 3rd highest military decoration. The 30th Division crossed the Rhine River in March 1945, pursuing the retreating German army across their homeland. In April, they captured Braunschweig and helped reduce Magdeburg. And on April 12, 1945, elements of the 30th Division, Francis Currey's unit, liberated the Weferlingen subcamp of Buchenwald concentration camp. They found 421 prisoners in desperate need of medical attention. Slave laborers who had been forced to build engines for the German war effort. The next day, April 13th, members of the 30th encountered a train carrying Jewish concentration camp prisoners. 200 had escaped. The American soldiers sent tanks to find the train with the remaining inmates. They located it near the village of Farsleben. When the German guards saw American tanks, they surrendered without a fight. This is what the 30th Infantry Division fought for. This is what Francis Currey fought for. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The 30th Division had been in almost continuous combat for 282 days. They had earned 6 Medals of Honor, Francis Currey's among them, 65 Distinguished Service Crosses, 1,718 Silver Stars, 6,319 Bronze Stars, and 20,000 Purple Hearts. 3,435 men of the 30th Infantry Division were killed in action. 12,960 were wounded. Francis Currey received 3 Purple Hearts, wounded 3 times in combat. The third came after Germany's surrender, when he was shot while disarming German soldiers in Bavaria. He was 20 years old when he received the Medal of Honor. He had entered the army green at 17, hadn't lived much of a life before the war. The orphan farm boy who worked for room and board had become one of the most decorated soldiers in American history. But what do you do after being the scariest soldier in World War II? How do you return to normal life after everything you've seen and done? Francis Currey left the army in 1946 as a first sergeant. He returned to a nation that wanted to move on, to forget the horrors of war and build a prosperous peacetime America. Currey went to work for the Veterans Administration. For 30 years, he worked as a counselor at the Stratton VA Medical Center in Albany, New York. The warrior became a healer, helping other veterans navigate the complicated process of getting education benefits, medical care, and support. He used the GI Bill to earn a degree in horticulture from Cornell University. After retiring from the VA in 1980, he operated his own landscaping business. He later worked at a hotel in South Carolina, booking conventions. He married Wilma French. They built a life together, a family, a home, a quiet existence far removed from frozen Belgian battlefields and German tanks. He coached Little League. He volunteered in his community. He served on various committees and boards. For decades, he lived the life that so many who died in that Belgian field never got to live. But Frank Currey never forgot where he came from. He became a powerful voice for veterans' rights. He served on the board of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, eventually becoming its president. And he spoke to students. Hundreds, maybe thousands of students over the years. He told them his story, not to glorify war, but to teach them something he'd learned on that frozen December morning in 1944. He would tell them, "If the situation arises, you can rise to the situation." He told military members, "Take all the training you can. Make sure you know how to operate that weapon." Currey understood something profound about that medal around his neck. When asked about it, he echoed what so many Medal of Honor recipients have said. He wore it for the men who didn't come home. It wasn't his medal. It belonged to every soldier of the 30th Infantry Division, to the 84 Americans murdered at Malmedy, to the 3,435 men of Old Hickory who were killed in action. He was just the one who survived to carry it. In 1998, Hasbro immortalized Francis Currey as a G.I. Joe action figure, the first in a series honoring Medal of Honor recipients. A child's toy celebrating a real hero. In 2003, his hometown of Hurleyville honored him with a massive celebration. In 2006, he was inducted into the New York State Senate Veterans Hall of Fame. In 2013, a mural of Currey was unveiled at the Sullivan County Museum. That same year, his photograph appeared on the cover sheet of a U.S. Postal Service packet of Medal of Honor stamps, one of 12 recipients honored. And through it all, Frank Currey remained humble. When he spoke about that December day in 1944, he didn't call himself a hero. He said it was just a reaction, that he felt well-trained and knew what he was doing. "I was probably thinking, where the hell is that tank fire coming from?" he once recalled with typical understatement. On October 8, 2019, Francis Sherman Currey died peacefully at his home in Selkirk, New York. He was 94 years old, one of the last living World War II Medal of Honor recipients in New York State and all of New England. When he passed, The teachers and students who had heard him speak mourned. The Holocaust survivors he had helped liberate mourned. The veterans he had counseled mourned. The nation he had served mourned. So why was Francis Sherman Currey the scariest soldier of World War II? It wasn't just his extensive knowledge of weapons, though that was remarkable. It wasn't just his courage, though he had that in abundance. It wasn't even his tactical brilliance, though his actions that day at Malmedy read like something out of an action movie. Francis Currey was terrifying because he represented something the German army couldn't understand and couldn't defeat. The determined American soldier who refused to quit, who refused to be intimidated, who saw impossible odds and decided to fight anyway. The orphan who had survived by his own determination, the farm boy who'd worked for his room and board, the teenager deemed too immature to be an officer. When the moment came, when tanks were rolling and men were dying, and a German offensive was trying to smash through American lines, Frank Currey became the thing that nightmares are made of. Francis Sherman Currey lived 94 years. He saw an orphaned childhood, the worst war in human history, and then 74 years of peace. He married, raised a family, helped other veterans, and taught children about service and sacrifice. But for 12 hours on December 21st, 1944, he was something else entirely. He was vengeance for the murdered prisoners at Malmedy. He was the thin line holding against the darkness. He was the warrior every German soldier feared to face. He was the scariest soldier of World War II. And he wore his medal for every soldier who never made it home.